Hello and welcome back to the Football Heritage Podcast. I'm your host, Rory Bryce, and I'm joined first of all today by Dan Orlowitz.
Hey Rory, thanks for having me.
And I'm also joined by Stuart Woodward.
Hi there, nice to meet you.
Yeah, it's nice to meet you guys as well. Absolute pleasure to have you on this morning, although it's, believe, around early evening, mid-evening, where you guys are in Japan. I've got Dan and Stuart on with me today to talk everything about supporters culture in Japan, ranging from football clubs at the highest level down to lower league level. We'll be discussing the culture of the game in Japan, as well as the fan groups who have really been providing a bit of noise, a bit of colour and a bit of passion across the years in football in Japan. This is going to be a really good episode for me. It's kind of a nice full circle one because if our listeners think back to summer 2021 when Ange Postecoglou joined Celtic, Dan and Stuart were quite heavily involved in reporting on his move, but I think more importantly persuading Celtic fans that he was in fact the right choice for the job. Part of the purpose of doing this episode, as well as talking about different football cultures around the world, different heritages and identities tied to that, it's also to break down some misconceptions that maybe exist around Japanese society and Japanese football and spread a bit more knowledge about supporters culture in Japan to our wider audience, which is obviously more based in the UK and Europe. So that's everything that we're going to be discussing today. Dan, first of all, is a freelance journalist who's written about Japanese football for more than 15 years and covered a number of major international sporting events like the 2019 Rugby World Cup, 2020 Tokyo Olympics and Paralympic Games, and also the 2022 Beijing Winter Olympics. So Dan, why don't you tell our listeners a little bit more about yourself?
Well, first off, again, thank you for having me on. It's always a pleasure. And yeah, as you said, kind of a full circle thing. Boy, those Ange days, those were great, weren't they?
They were the best days of my life.
Oh, man. And I think that really, that era of sort of talking to Celtic fans and having to explain, well, this is where he's coming from, getting to introduce players like Kyogo, Furuhashi, and Daisen Maeda and Reo Hatate to Scottish and UK and European fans and kind of just explaining, well, these are the clubs that they're coming from. These are the cultures that they're coming from and why it all matters. The perception that so many people have had of Japanese football fans for so long is, well, every 4 years you see them at the World Cup and they sound great, even though they only have maybe 3-4 chants max, and they always clean up their seats after the game, and those are sort of the common memes. But the truth is that the supporter culture has a depth to it and a breadth to it that most people don't get exposed to on a regular basis. And I feel like that's just worth changing because there's so much incredible stuff happening in our terraces every weekend. And there has been for just so many years now. And then that's what I love getting into, because that's the culture that has helped to develop the J League and Japanese football into what it is today.
Yeah, exactly. That's a really, really good way of putting it, Dan. Thinking back to those Ange Postecoglou days, Ange was coming from the J-League, so everyone wondered how he was going to translate into Scottish football, and that's being polite. A lot of people really weren't convinced. But then obviously we signed Kyogo Furuhashi, we signed Daisen Maeda, Reo Hatate, Yusuke Ideguchi in winter, and then we've had a sort of stream of Japanese players come through at Celtic, although albeit not to the success of Kyogo Maeda and Hatate. But what was interesting about when Ange came was that all of a sudden Celtic had social media accounts in Japan and we were flooded with merchandise that was based around Japanese culture. That really started bringing a greater understanding of J-League football, certainly to fans in Scotland in any case. We obviously other clubs had Japanese players. Machino at Hearts probably being the most notable example in between, but this is really what started a lot of Celtic fans and other Scottish football fans really engaging with the Japanese game a lot more. And Stuart, obviously you have quite a lot of experience of doing that yourself. A veteran groundhopper based in Japan and a fervent supporter of Yokohama F. Marinos, someone who also organises the Tokyo Celtic Supporters Club. So Stuart, tell our listeners a little bit about you and your experience within Japanese football.
Yeah, actually, I started out just watching football casually on TV, catching any matches. And I was around in Japan for the start of the J League, and I watched on the TV, but I never really thought that I could actually participate, go to matches and things like that. And it was when the kind of the internet got connected with football that tickets became easier to buy. And my son, when he was about 10 years old, suddenly became interested in football. So I said, okay, let's go and watch the local team, which just happened to be Yokohama Marinos, because we're in the hometown, and Japanese clubs have a designated area where there's a hometown. They have hometown activities. So basically, when the league started, or when a new football club gets established, they say this is our hometown. So I'm in the Yokosuka area, so that's the hometown for Marinos, and they moved their training ground like just around the corner from my house. But anyway, we started to go, and we really loved it. We have friends at the stadium already who were going there, a friend and his two sons. So we started out, and I hardly missed a match after that. And that was about 2012. I went to all home matches and all away matches in Japan. That was a kind of a pivotal thing for me.
No, that's fantastic. Really entrenched within the game within Japan by the sounds of things then, and obviously having gone for such a long time and being an active part of the fan culture, I think gives you a really good insight into what it is we're going to be discussing today. And like Dan said, I guess part of the reason that we're doing this recording is so that we can say to people that Japanese supporter culture is so much more than just cleaning up after themselves after football matches, which, like you rightly said, has become a massive meme and is something that only ever comes up every few years because you only ever see their fans at the World Cup, certainly from a European perspective anyway. But Japanese supporter culture, fan culture, and the culture within the terraces is huge. It's incredibly passionate, it's incredibly noisy. And like Stuart said before as well, the atmosphere is also friendly and welcoming for women and children too, which is really, really important in contrast to what we have here in Europe. So I suppose the best place for us to start would be the history and growth of supporter culture in Japan, because it kind of has a history that mirrors that somewhat within the UK to an extent.
So let me explain. Japanese supporter culture is based on Japanese culture, and people take things very seriously. So people who get into football supporting are quite serious about it. I don't think there's so many casual fans. You're either dedicated or you're not. And people who come into it, are spending a lot of time and money. And one of the big, the big elephant in the room is baseball, because that's the major sport in the country. So that has a lot more TV coverage and a lot more, I think, active support in people going to the matches, in the stadium itself. Yeah, so it's a bit of a competition between football and baseball in itself. And I look at Marinos, right, from where they came from. They came as one of the founding members of the J League. But the J League itself was based on the previous league, the football league, that were all corporate clubs. I think most of them were the corporate clubs. So Marinos is the Nissan club, and they retain the sponsor. Urawa would be the Mitsubishi club, and each of the clubs had their own culture. So the initial supporters were quite often members of that, employees of the club, like a company team. So then with the J League, they expanded out to try and make it more popular and spin off the football clubs into proper football companies that run a club rather than being the company club. And so they kind of manufactured, in a way, identities for each of the clubs and gave them mascots and branding that all came together when they formed the J League. So there's that kind of background to it too. But one of the things with Marinos was that they adopted initially this Argentinian supporter culture. Right, so a lot of the songs, come from clubs that were in there, and I think they had at the very start a few Argentinian players, and one time Ozzy Ardiles, the former Spurs player was the manager there. So there's banners and things like that. There's Spanish and mixed in with Japanese. You got like a vamo like comes in the Japanese chants like, and so it's quite a few like it's kind of stuff that's picked up there. So if you came and you listened to the songs, you would know that a lot of them are based on the South American songs rather than on the UK songs. That you hear very few of those tunes in the stadium. So that's one of the early days were from that kind of culture. Yeah.
I want to bring up sort of for active support culture in particular, to go back to sort of the early days of organized team sports in Japan, let's call it, where you had the Oendan, which is sort of the formal cheering group. And this is something that was especially in high schools and universities. And American listeners, probably even UK listeners, I'm actually sort of not familiar with whether UK collegiate sports have supporter culture such as it is, but in the United States, it's certainly very prevalent where you have cheering sections, and it's very organized. And Japan took that, and as Stuart mentioned, most of the J League clubs have roots in as company teams, and some of these teams have histories going back to the 40s and 50s. So these companies, they would organize a cheering group, and with baseball, the clubs established their own supporter groups, their own cheering squads, which have trumpeters and capos, you're the people who are calling the chants, and the club pays them and gives them money to go from game to game. I believe the Hanshin Tigers have one group in Tokyo and one who does all the games on the east side of Japan, and then the main group in Osaka that does all the games on the west side of Japan. So you had that culture of very organized, methodical support. And then as the 70s and 80s rolled around, one very important factor in the development of supporter culture in Japan was the Intercontinental Cup, or better known as the Toyota Cup, which later begat the Club World Cup. People probably remember that the Intercontinental Cup used to be a home and away thing, and there was a lot of violence, and the competition stopped for a few years. And Toyota, the auto company, brought it back, and one of the conditions was that Japan host it. It takes place sort of roughly in December. And the result of that was that you had all of these top European and South American teams coming to Japan and playing these games, and their supporters would come with them. So for the first time in the 70s and 80s, Japanese supporters are experiencing this support, not just on a bootleg VHS tape or a delayed broadcast, but in person at the National Stadium. And that had a really big impact. And so when the J League comes around, each club, as Stuart mentioned, adapts their own style. And a lot of that was kind of based on what did the local supporters want to do. So some of them were influenced by Argentina and Brazil. Some of them were influenced by Italy. And you see that today. I mean, FC Tokyo adapted "You'll Never Walk Alone" as sort of the club's pre-match anthem. And so, but the Capo for many years was a big fan of Argentinian football. So a lot of their chants are from that. So there's this insane mix happening where it's like, you'll go to a J League game and hear an Argentinian melody, and then a Brazilian melody, and then, an Oasis song, and then a Japanese, and then like a J-pop song, or an anime theme, and it's all in the same game. Could be all within the same half hour from the same team. Yeah, it's the beauty of it.
Yeah, exactly. It's a great mix of different football cultures to create your own. It's taking all these parts that are well known around the world, but that are obviously popular, and actually putting them all into one place. And like I alluded to, there was also some mirrors of what was going on in football in Europe at the time as well, because you also had some instances of violence within sport as the supporters culture was developing. But eventually it's got to this stage in the modern day where, like I said earlier, it's incredibly vibrant. I know, like, a lot of people are quite quick to say that supporters culture in Asia and Southeast Asia is very different to that within Europe, but I don't think it is. I think that, like you said, Dan, there's a lot of similarities, and obviously, different supporters cultures across the world pick different things from each other. They always have done. And I would say that maybe one of the only differences is that in Japan it's a lot more open and a lot more welcoming for people.
Yeah, I think that, our ultras have issues sometimes, but like if I describe our issues to a European ultra, they'll laugh because it's like, we'll get one pitch invasion every 5 to 10 years, give or take. And it's usually just the one team. There's handbags at derbies. Sometimes there's smoke bombs at derbies, but like for the most part, it's like you can bring your grandparents, you can bring your parents, you can bring your girlfriend, you can bring your kids, and they're not going to be exposed to anything like that. You'll have female flag wavers, you'll have female drummers, a couple clubs have female, it's the clubs or the league they used to publish a demographics, like fan demographics in an annual report, and some clubs have 50% female fans.
It's incredible.
51% even. And so the reason that exists is because the J League has at times very forcibly protected an environment in which that can happen. So if there is significant trouble of any sort, the league comes down, and it comes down hard. And some people will say that, they're being heavy-handed, and, clubs banning fans for a middle finger or something like that. Like, nothing that anyone in Europe hasn't done before. but that's, that's the balance. There can be banter, but it has to be very, very good natured. And that's, that's sort of the way it is.
Yeah, I guess if we go back to the episode that we released last week, which was a kind of general rundown of the history of different ultras movements and supporters groups. If for any of our listeners who listen to that, you'll probably be picking up on a few similarities in this episode as well with what we're discussing, but it very much sounds like they're trying to nurture a supporters culture without leaning at all into the violent aspect of it, and actually showing that supporters culture can be good, can be fun, can be vibrant, but can also be open for other people. But you can still have that competitiveness that exists within football and amongst different fan groups, which again is important. It's something that's a little bit different, and it's something that the Japanese supporter culture is obviously trying to make itself known for. But Stuart, obviously you're heavily involved within the supporters culture, so you'll be able to tell us a little bit more about this and just generally how supporters culture has developed, I guess, since the turn of the millennium.
Yeah, when I joined, obviously the supporter culture was like very well advanced that time, and as Dan was kind of alluding to there, Marinos recently banned 60 of the ultras who made up the kind of the core of the support, but support went on. Like the previous leader came back, and he basically just took over anyway. So they were very much modelled on, I guess, kind of European ultra groups, and organising tifo, and obviously like going to every match, and all of the things that go with it. But as you say, the whole thing about violence is totally outlawed. Dan said, like, these guys just got into a bit of a scuffle outside the stadium, and somebody who was not related to the main group brought in a flare, and that's covered under the pyrotechnics laws in Japan. So the police were called, and because the police were called, basically, it became into a huge issue. So they really cracked down on very minor infractions to keep it family friendly, but still the dedication is there, and the activities are there. So I think that whole thing of like importing the ultra culture, and there was in the distant past, like there was a group at our club that were kind of like a bad boy Italian ultra themed group, and they got into trouble and were banned. It's very heavy handed because the bans are basically lifetime bans. Wow. There's no limit to it, so you may come back at some time. And recently there was one announcement on one club that they had let back some of these guys who had caused trouble in the past, and it was a long time ago. They jumped over the barrier onto the pitch, I think. Like, it's just a really weird thing, I think. And I think it was more after the match when the players come around. And another thing that we saw at Celtic when Ange came around was that definitely in Japan, after the match, win or lose, the team walks around to all of their fans, and we'll stand and join in the celebration with the fans. And usually the manager stays a little bit back, but if the team is not doing well at all, then the fans kind of routinely, and the relegation clubs, this will happen to them at some point. They just won't leave the stadium, and they'll have a sit-in in the stadium after the match, and they'll wait until the club president or director, whoever it is, comes out. It's not to talk to the manager; it's to talk to the people who are running the club. And they wait there until they come out. They want to hear, okay, what are they going to do about it? This thing. Basically, the bottom three clubs, it's going to happen at some point if they're in danger. And it's not something that you would see, like for example in the Premier League. You could never imagine that they'd be calling for the directors to come out and address the fans about what's going on. And also a little bit of that is because the fans, as we said, are organised around a capo, which is called a call leader, one that I'm most familiar with. There's maybe 2 or 3 large supporter groups in the stadium, and they have very friendly relationships with each other. But they appoint a call leader, and he's the guy with the megaphone, and everybody else is following him for the support. But also the club is in contact with the call leader. So the fans have a way to contact the club through the call leader, and that's not officially arranged with the clubs. And I think they don't acknowledge that there is that like official appointment. But through the call leader, the ultra groups will get certain privileges, like for example, going into the stadium early to put up the banners and the flags and stuff like that. Or the club will call on them and say, we want you to do a big tifo on this date because we're going to take photographs of the stadium. I think they'll have that give and take with the clubs on a semi-official basis. And things like organising the line outside the stadium, like for away matches, we quite often have assigned seats and free seating. The fan groups will organise the lines and get people to line up, and there's a system for getting a place in the line, which is organised by the club, but it's kind of policed by the fan groups in a very friendly way. So there's a lot of like interaction between the clubs and the fan groups on a semi-official basis.
Yeah, it sounds like a completely different form of fan protest as well. Like, just given the issues that Celtic have had, especially this season with fan protest, some people have suggested a sit-in, but it hasn't really went anywhere. Not to say that it's fallen in deaf ears. It may be being considered by the people who are protesting. I'm not involved in that process, but you're right, Stuart, that the thought of any kind of sit-in taking place so that the supporters can have a direct line of communication with the people running the club, in the UK at least, is completely unheard of.
If I can add just a bit of context on the fan protests, one reason that they're kind of seldomly used or used very tactically is that the vast majority of J-League clubs don't own their stadiums. The stadiums are owned usually by the municipality, the city government, or the prefectural government, and the clubs are tenants, essentially, which means that as tenants, the clubs are on the hook for all costs that are involved until the last person leaves the stadium, which means that the longer the fans stay, that's electricity the club has to pay for. That's overtime for the security the club has to pay for. It does, in a way, like it hurts your club a little. You know, they might have to pay, say, a few £1,000s more that day in overtime. But the point is to send a message.
Yeah.
There's one incident I remember, again, sort of involving Marinos. Again, the unheard of in European ultras culture. There was a game, it was Marinos against Urawa Reds. Some of the Urawa supporters had put a banner over one of the Nissan logos, over a Nissan billboard in the stadium, and a number of Marinos supporters took offense to that and ran over across the back stand, and there were handbags, and some security had to go in and separate them, and they had to go and remove the Urawa banner from the thing. And when the clubs publish a very thorough guide of where you're allowed to put banners and where you can't. And can you imagine in any other country, ultras going to that length just because the club's owner was disrespected. Because, like, for I think a lot of European fan identity is about it's the badge over everything. It doesn't matter who owns it. It doesn't matter who sponsors it. It's about the badge. So that tells you the mindset, that one of the ways in which it is so different. Like, the sponsors and the club owners are worthy of your respect. Yes, they have to earn it, but supporters care a lot about who's helping the club. You know, it's not just a thing where, oh, some random betting company sponsored our shirt for a year. You know, I'm never going to, use them, but thank you for the money. Like, supporters care a lot, especially when it's smaller clubs. You know, any company that decides to give their club the time of day and buy, a pitch side hoarding or whatever, they'll thank them on social media. They'll repost a photo. They'll go to the store or whatever it is. So the mindset is so totally different.
100%. From my perspective, like, as an outsider looking in, that to me suggests that they're very proud of where their club has come from, and that's that's one of the heritage aspects within Japanese supporters culture, that they're proud of where their club has come from and that they're willing to defend where that club has come from, and any physical logo or brand or symbolic representation of where the origins of their clubs lie. So that is actually really interesting, because, like you said, Dan, in Europe, I think probably with the exception of Germany, the majority of ultras groups aren't actively created to be in opposition to the ownership of the club, but they often are just by nature of who they are and what they do. I think at best relationships between ultras groups and clubs are okay to moderate, but most of the time they're acting in the interests of the supporters, and there's a very clear divide between the ultras and the ownership of the club, because, like you said, badge, club, what the club means comes first. That is actually really interesting. As you mentioned clubs there, we're actually going to move on to the club scene in Japan as well. Because we've obviously mentioned some big names, Urawa Red Diamonds, Yokohama F Marinos, you've also got Vissel Kobe, you've got Gamba Osaka. It's a huge number of really large and successful Japanese football clubs. So let's talk a little bit about the club scene and what the culture around that is like. Japan's obviously a huge country with a number of different cultures within that as well, so it must be great having this amount of variety of football clubs to see and support on your doorsteps.
Yeah, and I think that the cool thing about that is that, even though the league is now, I think, 33 years old this year, some of these clubs, the histories will go back decades. And even some of the newer clubs, every season, they're writing a new chapter. And the fact that there's so much variety, even just from the J1 to the J2, it's so different. And from the J2 to the J3, it's so different. And you have clubs that have spent their entire existence in the J2, and now, the case of, say, Mito Holly Hawk, they're in the J1. And so what's that going to look like this year? What's that going to look like for Mito and for the city and for the stadium to have all of these J1 teams and their supporters coming there for in many cases, the first time? You've got clubs like Kashima Antlers. Kashima are the most successful club in J1 history, and one of two clubs along with Marinos to have never been relegated. For them to have had the success that they've had, both domestically and internationally, known around the world for being the club that Zico helped establish, in a way. They existed before he arrived, but he was the one who helped them professionalize and sort of showed the club how to run things. Very famously, out on the pitch with a ruler showing the groundskeepers how short the grass should be cut. Staying up all night in the team dorm to catch players who are trying to sneak out to get a smoke or buy snacks. There's a reason that his statue is outside of Kashima Stadium, and that every game they have that giant pullover banner, the spirit of Zico, and every club has a story like that. And some are tied to their sporting success, some are tied to the history of the region or the city, or there's as much history in Japan as there is in any other country. We haven't had enough time in professional sports for that history to come out in the sporting context, but it doesn't mean it isn't there.
100%. And that's what, to me anyway, and for a lot of our listeners, that's what makes it all the more interesting, is that obviously from the European perspective, we're not as exposed to Japanese football as probably, I mean, I would like and many others would like, although that has grown over the last few years. It's about actually engaging with it and actually immersing yourself in it to get a full understanding of it. But like everywhere, and it's like one of the things that I hate people always say about, the history of soccer in the US is that the United States doesn't have a soccer history. It's like, well, it actually does. It has a very deep and a very rich soccer history, but you need to go looking for where it actually was. It's not just all about the MLS. But if you look at the East Coast, if you look at Utah, if you look at the mining clubs that existed around Chicago and the rest of Illinois, like Japan, like anywhere else, these places have a really, really rich and dense history of soccer, and you can find so many great stories from them. One thing that I really wanted to know is how supporter culture translates to clubs further down the league system, because I guess in Europe you have this big trend recently of people going to follow non-league clubs because they feel a disconnect with football clubs at the top level, for example, the Premier League or the Scottish Premier League. So how does that translate in Japan? Do lower league clubs have the same type of following, the same fervent following as, for example, J1 or J2 clubs do?
Yeah, very much so. The interesting thing is that I was interested in Okinawa as an island and the culture of Okinawa. And when I discovered they had a football club that was playing in all around Japan, I started to follow them too. So like sometimes there'd be on a Saturday, there'd be a Marinos match and at the big stadium. And then I'd go to some smaller local stadium to go and watch the FC Ryukyu. Originally, when I started going there were about 20 supporters, because if you support them, you have to take an aeroplane flight for every away match, basically. So we're in the Kanto area. So they had a Kanto area supporters club. And if you were in that area, you'd go to as many matches as you could. And there was like every season, maybe 3 or 4 matches that you could make, and then you may make one long distance one. So you'd see the same people, but a lot of those people wouldn't go to the home matches just because it's so far away. It's a bit like somebody in the north only going to the matches around their area, and they won't go to the matches in the south. Basically, the thing is that the stadiums are the same size. So some of these small clubs have got a massive like athletic stadium with a massive running track and kind of like say built on a budget, so it's a part of concrete. There's not much in terms of official decoration, or like as Dan was saying, like they don't own the stadium, so they inhabit the stadium once every couple of weeks. But outside, you'd still have a lot of food trucks, and they'd have like events, club organized events with fan events. So it's quite kind of like a buzzing atmosphere outside when you go there. They would have their small group of ultras there, and like they'd all be dressed up in their ultra gear, and they'd have flags, and somebody's brought the drum and things like that. So they're just as well organized, but on a much smaller scale. And some of these away venues, as I say, like they're athletic stadiums, but behind the goals they have like a grassy bank. So you go to some places and, you can sit in the main stand or the back stand, or you can sit on the grass, like, and watch the match. And I was down in Nara at the end of the year, and it was getting a little bit cold, but it was a beautiful sunny day. The Japanese winter is very like bright blue skies and bright sunshine. So the grass was all a little bit, dying off, but we were all sitting on the bank, lying down on the bank, watching the match. Because the smaller clubs, it's really like, I know people who only go to the smaller club matches, and then I know people who they have a big club and a smaller club that they go to both of them. So you can watch like 2 matches in a weekend in your area, and if you want to travel around, there are some people who traveled around and like some really crazy people in my in my thoughts, but they would manage to see 4 matches on a weekend, because they would go and see like an afternoon match, an evening match, and one might be an amateur match, and one might be a ladies match. So they would manage to see 4 matches in a weekend by just going around to these smaller clubs. So it's definitely very fun, very friendly. As a foreigner going to these smaller clubs, you'll make friends a lot more easily, because you don't disappear into the crowd as much. And another thing with like the culture, pretty much anywhere in Japan is that if you keep going to the same place, you go to the same stadium, you go to the same bar, you go to the same club event, eventually people realize, oh, you're not going to go away, and they will start to talk to you. Like people are less likely to invest in talking to tourists, but then again, even as a tourist, you could have a fantastic time and just meet the right person and be treated very well. So the city clubs tend to have, like, the top divisions tend to be centered around the major cities in Japan. But there's a lot of travel culture with J League too. A lot of people, as soon as the schedule comes out for the start of the season, they're booking their holidays. They're saying, okay, we're going to be in this city on this night, so we'll book a hotel. We'll go by train to this one. Okay, we'll go by car to this one. This will be a 3-day weekend, so we're going to, explore the area around that stadium. And these are kind of like middle-aged and even old-aged supporters combining the tourism and supporting the football, which is a little bit of an unusual twist to it. It's not so much the young guys on the coach drinking beers. Like it's a whole, like, a travel culture involved, and so going away to, like, distant places can be quite a holiday experience for a lot of people.
That's really interesting, Stuart. And I actually want to come back to one of the things that you said earlier, and I guess it maybe kind of plays into that tourist culture that exists around travel and support in Japan. You mentioned earlier that a lot of these clubs have founded, there's this idea of the hometown. This is our hometown. This is where we're going to be based, sort of thing. And you also mentioned that some people have a big club and they have a small club. And I think that can be said for people across the world. But for example, in Portugal, for instance, the majority of people will support one of either Benfica, Porto, or Sporting. And then maybe have a local team that they also support. Very, very prominent within Portugal that one of the big three kind of takes precedence. Within Japan, would you say it's more prominent that people have a big team and a small team, or are people attached to this idea of the hometown and the place behind it as being a sense of pride that is attached to their football club?
It's not such a, like you look at Spain, like you either support Madrid or Barcelona, basically, as your big team. But it's not so polarized as that, because in the top there are 20 teams. So people generally have a J1 team that they would support. But most people outside of football are not really into it. So in the whole of the culture, like, people will come and watch the national team in a bar, but people who are not, like, on the periphery, are just not into it at all. Like, basically, so you have either you're a J League supporter and you have a team and you attend some or many of the matches, or you're kind of like not into it at all. But then again, the people who do support a J League team, they might support another team, and quite often another local team in a lower division, just for convenience for going to the matches. Like, I'm a strange case in that I chose a team that's very far away, and like one of those things where you like a certain team, and it doesn't matter where they are. So, like, regardless of geography, if you can see them once or twice a year, it makes you happy.
So just to give listeners a sense of the pyramid, which is just to understand the scale, there's the J League is the first through third divisions. There is the Japan Football League, which is the national amateur competition, which is run by the Japan Football Association, and that's unofficially the J4.
Okay.
And there is promotion and relegation between the JFL and the J3 with some conditions that I won't get too into. There is then the 7 regional leagues that are collectively the 5th division, and there is a very convoluted process to get those teams to the JFL. There's a tournament and there's all this stuff, and it's super complicated. Below that, each prefecture, 47 of those in Japan, has at least 2 divisions, like 2 top divisions, sometimes I think 3 even. And then you're getting down to like city leagues. And it's gotten to the point where you can start at, the J9 or the J10 and work your way up to the J3. I mean, Iwaki did that. Under Armour owns them, and they just really quickly worked their way up the table. There's a lot, and I think especially these days, so many former players are getting involved in club ownership and starting clubs in a regional league or taking over clubs. Keisuke Honda founded Edo All United FC, I think it's called. They started in the Tokyo second, and now they're in the Kanto first. So they're technically only one division away from playing in a national league. Will they get there? I don't know. As this happens, I think that in the United States, you're used to investment groups putting in a lot of money into a USL team or an NASL, but big money investments. And here, it is much more grassroots. It is much more like shoestring budgets, volunteer staff, part-time players from the bottom up. That reflects, this could be another podcast, another episode in of itself, but it does reflect how the whole of the Japanese football pyramid was created to develop teams and players. The J League was founded to help Japan develop a national team that would be good enough to qualify for the World Cup. Like, that is every decision that the Japan Football Association and the J League have made over the last 30 odd years has been for the purpose with the goal of winning the World Cup. And so now we're facing these questions of like, well, how do you run clubs and how do you run leagues as businesses? And so the league is doing a lot to catch up in that respect. And it's challenging. And I think that the shift that we're going through this year from the calendar year season to the European style fall spring season, that's part of it, because the league wants clubs to gain more from the transfer market. They want to be able to sell players. They want to be able to bring in more players from Europe and from South America. So the lower division teams are very much the root of the grass, we're talking, but you can get some clubs that are doing really interesting stuff and new business models that traditional clubs, your Nissan is a big company and it runs like a big company and it runs its club like a big company, which can mean evolution comes slowly. But smaller clubs can actually do really interesting things on the sponsorship side in terms of activation and fan engagement and interesting sponsorship things. And in the next few years, we're going to possibly start to see some J3 clubs that have grown up in that environment and come up and doing very novel things.
It's fascinating. And within this kind of food chain, you also have what is really prominent, and I guess for player development as well, as university football and college football in Japan as well, because it's like, I think you alluded to it earlier, Dan, it's when you were talking about the kind of cheer groups and cheer teams and things like that. We have a couple of university teams in Scotland, but they're not, well supported. It's not really a thing over here. I would say you've got Stirling University and you've got Loughborough, which are the two big sporting universities in the UK. But I wouldn't say that having any form of culture or even support surrounding university football is a big thing. I probably wouldn't say that the very least Stirling University is particularly significant within the development chain within Scottish football as well. But in Japan, university and college football seems to be a lot more prominent. And am I right in saying that these clubs attached to universities can also compete in the Emperor's Cup as well?
Yeah, so that's correct. So university teams can compete in the Emperor's Cup. Until, Stuart, tell me if I'm wrong, I think it was until 2013, 2014, thereabouts, youth teams and high school teams could also compete in the Emperor's Cup.
Wow, that's pretty cool.
I think it was in 2001, a high school team took Yokohama F. Marinos to penalties in,
incredible,
I think, the round of 16 or something like that. And that's that's insane.
Yeah.
In the last year that youth teams were eligible to play in the Emperor's Cup, I think Kashiwa Reysol's under 18s actually got to play the senior team in like the second or third round, which is really cool. And so
it's cool. It's unique.
Yeah,
it's unique.
and so that all comes from obviously before the J League, clubs weren't establishing academies until the 80s, really. They didn't have youth teams until then. And so before then, it was high schools and universities that were doing the bulk of player development for Japan, which is how, like Shizuoka Prefecture had so many powerhouse schools, and that's how Shizuoka became known as sort of the kingdom of Japanese football, because it was known as just being a hotbed for development. And then in time, we saw other prefectures develop their own programs. You have, I could name like Funabashi High School in Chiba, Maebashi in Gunma Prefecture. But that was where current Machida Zelvia head coach Go Kuroda established a dynasty. He was coaching there. He was the head coach there at it was Aomori Yamada for 20 years. Building like the kind of high school sports dynasty that I, as an American, expect from, say, American football or basketball. Certainly not, football. So those programs have persisted, even though obviously J League clubs all have academies going, and some clubs are very good at producing professional players. But there is such an affection, especially at the high school level. You go to the national high school championships, which take place from late December through coming of age day, which is sort of the day that kids officially become adults in Japan. Basically, anyone who's turned 20 becomes an adult. So that's in mid-January. They host that final at the National Stadium, and it sells out. I think this year they had 60,000 in attendance for a high school game. They host the earlier rounds around smaller stadiums at Todoroki, NAC 5, possibly Fukuda Denshi Arena, but basically smaller stadiums in the Tokyo area. And a lot of those games will sell out. So you're selling 10, 15, 20,000 tickets, to watch high school kids play. And it's not just the parents and the kids and the classmates who are coming, although they do come in droves, but it is just people who want to. It is part of football tradition here, much in the same way as the Boxing Day fixtures are a part of British football. Like it is tradition, in the same way that the Emperor's Cup final for most of its history took place on New Year's Day and would still sell out. The reason that university football has become so important is that when you're coming out of high school, or if you're coming out of an academy, you are still a minor. And so your contract options are kind of limited, or they have been for many years. That system is actually changing a little this year. The very short story is that by going to university, as a graduating university student, you have much more freedom to choose your club. And so that gives players an advantage if they aspire to go to Europe someday. You coming out of university, you can sort of pick who you want your dance partner to be, and ask for very favorable terms in terms of what your buyout clause might be, for example. And clubs sort of at that point have to say yes. Whereas if you're, let's say, an FC Tokyo Academy graduate, you kind of have to sign with FC Tokyo. You can't entertain offers from another club.
That's actually really fascinating. It's really interesting hearing this, and how, like, that to me sounds like a really good setup. Like that would be brilliant if we had something like that in Scotland, for different reasons, and that could be an entire podcast in itself. But I love the fact that the culture around college and university football is so strong. Just a culture that is really passionate about football, a culture that really fervently supports whoever it is they have, whether it's a larger team or a smaller team, or whether it's a college team as well. And as a football fanatic, that's all you can really want. If you are someone moving to Japan, or planning to move to Japan, and you're a football fan, then I don't think you could really ask for much more in terms of a football culture. Just to go back to the supporters quickly, one thing that I did want to ask both of you, where is it that supporters groups, and obviously it'll be different based on the club, where is it they actually draw their identities and values and heritage from when they go on the terraces? Is it just club based, or is it based around the areas that they're from, the places that they're from, or a wider set of values that aren't just attached to the football club?
It depends from club to club, but when it comes to the individual supporter groups, it depends a lot on the organizers, who the capo was inspired by. So again, I bring up FC Tokyo, and Asahi Ueda. So Asahi Ueda, he founded Ultras Nippon, which is the main supporter group for the national team. And he also founded Ikeikedan, which was FC Tokyo's main supporter group for about over a decade, or I guess 20 years plus a bit of the pandemic. And then they got themselves in trouble and stepped back. So he spent some time studying abroad in Leeds. So he was influenced by English football, but he was also a big Argentinian football fan. I think he's a big Boca Juniors supporter. And so he took a lot of their chants and took those melodies. And so it's sort of whatever the original capo of that club was, whatever he liked, whatever they watched. If they watched Serie A, they're going to look at Italian clubs. If they saw flamenco come as a kid, they were going to take their chance. If they were Manchester United supporters, they were going to look at what they're doing. If they listened to a lot of punk rock as a kid, they're going to put in like Green Day and The Clash and, Kiss and whoever, which is great. Like again, I talked about it earlier, just how much variety you'll hear. And it does reflect the character of each supporter group. And as far as values, I mean, it's mostly for better or for worse. Most groups are largely just sort of apolitical. Like they're there to support the club, and they may support certain charity things. Like if the club is doing disaster relief for another part of Japan that got hit by an earthquake or something like that, like the supporter group will help with that. But like they're not, we don't really have pride matches in Japan. I mean, that's sort of a bigger institutional thing, but like you're not going to see that sort of display. But you're also not going to see 99.9% of the time, you're not going to see any like discrimination or racism or no right-wing statements. Like politics are very much a third rail in Japanese sports. And it's all about, if you're not there to support the players on the pitch, and if you're not there to support the badge, you shouldn't be there.
That's really interesting. And again, a very, very different from European ultras and how they are different in terms of the identities and the heritages that these supporters pull from. What about yourself, Stuart? I think it sounds like that, and obviously, like you mentioned, there's a lot of variety, and a lot of different ultras groups and supporters groups pull from that variety from their different experiences. But just from your experience, Stuart, what is the identity of Marinos supporters?
Yeah, well, as Dan said, like you have the original supporters and the first like core leader, and they very much set the scene. And so the songs that go back to the start, we're still singing those songs, and each core leader brings in his own new songs, and then some of them thrive, and then some of them disappear. And like some of the banners that we have, they've been there from the very start. So the club develops its own history. Dan mentioned about Boca Juniors. Like we're singing their songs, like but I'm not sure who started that off, because what happened. I think some of the smaller clubs, they will develop a fan culture, and then they'll copy other J League clubs' songs. The same song will go around, and various clubs will have it. But like, who actually took that originally, that kind of meme from South America or wherever they got it from? They might even have got it from watching Italian football on a TV. That was very. I think it was a late night Italian football program, on like a highlights program, and I think that was really influential at the start of the J League, because a lot of people still talk about that, and they know all the football players in Italy of that time. So all these things, it's quite very difficult to find out where they come from. And as Dan said about the political side, like I think that's almost discouraged, but even in society, it's not a big thing. Like you don't talk about politics at the pub and with friends, and people sometimes not really clued up on like things. It's kind of a little bit of a bubble where as long as everything's going okay, everybody's just doing their own things. They're not looking to the wider world. And I think the football culture definitely reflects that. But yes, like when there was a big earthquake in Japan, there are some groups that could call on the football supporter groups. Okay, can you help out? Can you come and we're going to do a cleanup in this town? Can you get people to come? And the organization is there waiting for things to happen. And I think that's kind of very positive thing in Japanese society too, because you need somebody to take the initiative to run things. And the people who are becoming like leaders of supporter groups in Japan, they're definitely like people who are a little bit different in Japan, like not in a bad way, but to stand up to say, okay, I'm going to be the leader. But they may have been the leader, as Dan mentioned earlier, of their school team support group. I think that follows through because like high school have an annual sports day, which is a huge event in the school year. People are practicing for that for the whole of the year basically, and they have performances, and they have, if you're not running and you're not competing, then you're in the very serious support group, and those people naturally kind of bubble up to become leaders, and I know, like we talk about, in one particular case in Marinos, like one person I think started 3 different support groups, and I'm not really sure why they span off, and but they became like independent groups of their own, and and another one that I got into very early on was that I was invited to go on the supporter bus, because they would be renting coaches and going to away matches. Sometimes they needed people to fill the spaces, so they'd seen me around, and then somebody says, "Stuart, okay, we've got a coach for the next match. You want to come along on our bus?" So it's like, "Oh, that's great, thank you very much." So I got on the bus. They got on the bus, and we were going away. They put on like old TV programs, like that you'd never see, that somebody had recorded them on DVDs, and they got them playing as we went to the match. And sometimes it would be a famous match against the team that we were playing against. But there was one where they got a documentary of Matsuda Naoki, who was a Yokohama player who was one of the kind of the iconic players, and then he got, at the end of his career, kind of, I won't say got booted out, but left the club and went to a 3rd division club because he wanted to play football. And there's this like huge iconography about him, because actually after a few months at the new club, he had a sudden heart attack and died. And I think he was only in his 30s at that time. And it's a really, like, everybody knows his story in Japan. So they were playing this video of his, and it included his, all the press clips and all of the background news to that. It was a professionally like TV documentary. And then they showed his like famous speech, which everybody's seen, that famous speech where he's telling the fans goodbye and I just want to play football and all that, and everybody's in tears. It's really iconic speech. But then I looked around, and the people on the front row of that stadium who were there, like bawling their eyes out, were sitting on the bus. So I was like, oh gosh, I'm in a really like historic group here that I hadn't really realised. Like these guys I know from the stadium would invite me on their bus, but there they were on the TV program on that thing that everybody knows. So there's a lot of like history kind of obviously organically grows, and for me, I've been to quite a few of the historic matches in the last about 15 years, like unforgettable matches that people still talk about. So that's where the culture comes from, the fans and their experience, I think.
It's amazing. And Dan, just quickly before we finish up, what's your experience of the supporters culture in Japan?
So I got my start in the J League. It was early 2007. I just moved to Japan a few months prior, and I went to an FC Tokyo game, and it was, I think, the first club football game I had been to. I mean, I played as a kid, but I'm from Philadelphia, and we didn't have an MLS team until 2010. And, I just ended up behind the goal because it looked like a cool place to go, and I had no idea what I was getting into. But as someone who grew up in a sports town, I just instantly fell into it, and there was something that appealed so much that even though that team was terrible, that first game, I think it was a 2-1 or 3-1 loss to Kashima Antlers, who went on to win the league. But just singing before the game and singing throughout, and the players coming over to bow and still kind of applauding for them. It was pretty early in the season, relatively. It resonated. And so I was eventually making banners, making my own flags. Like I did these gigantic vertical banners for the 2009 Nabisco Cup final, where Tokyo actually won that final 2-0 against Kawasaki Frontale, who are kind of like a quasi derby rival. After the game, the players, the whole team did the photo in front of the fans, and that was the front page on all the magazines. That was the cover. And you can see my banners because they're each like 3 or 4 meters tall, and you could see them from space. And just being a part of that community, where even though I was a foreigner very much, I credit those games with helping me learn Japanese, to be honest. Like, that was a place where after language school, I could go to the stadium and practice whatever I learned the day before. That was how I met Stuart and everyone else in the community. It was, we all had our little blogs, and we gathered on the big soccer forums, the Rising Sun news forums that Matsu used to run. That is, I think all that has been folded into Alan Gibson's J Soccer website. And so that's like, over time, the foreign fan community has come together. A lot of us have stuck it out through the years. Some people have come and gone. There's a kind of an interesting new wave of foreign J League fans that have come in through the internet era, especially from Southeast Asia, who have been connected through Chanatip and all the Thai players, Pratama Arhan, and like the sort of the Indonesian wave, even though none of them ever managed to get serious minutes. But like the J League has served as a very positive model for Southeast Asian fans. And so they want to watch the J League because they want to see Asia's best. To me, I look at, I don't want to say anything controversial about Celtic, because Lord knows I've done enough of that over the last 6 years. But like, I think that, like, as historic a club as Celtic is, it is a club that has a lot of serious problems.
Yes.
Both in terms of the front office now, but also in terms of like where it is in the greater football landscape. I think that
Correct.
I think that a lot of the problem with having a history as long as storied as the club does is that some people get hung up on that history for way longer than they should, and for better or for worse. And you've got a 2-horse race in a 12-team league, and that's just how it's been in Scotland forever. Whereas, the J League now, like, we have a 20, we start the season with 20 teams, and of those, maybe 12 can say with a straight face that they're going to contend for the title. And of those, like, actually 6 or 7 might actually, it depends on how the season goes. But like, there's going to be there can be a different champion every season. We don't know what's going to happen. Like, it's the chaos of the league. It is the fact that even when a team is doing terribly, their supporters will still show up, and they'll still have that atmosphere. I can tell people, go to this stadium. The football isn't going to be great, but you're going to have the best time of your life. The food is going to be amazing. The fans are going to be lovely. And, the view from the stadium is unmatched. And I think that that's like the J League in this era of like venture capital firms buying clubs and weird crypto services sponsoring uniforms, and
Yep.
and FIFA, and like the J League is it's weird that we talked about how Japanese supporters take a lot of influences, and that's really kind of representative of Japanese culture, that Japan isn't necessarily the best at inventing things, but it is good at improving things. It is good at that iteration, at taking all of these different components and making it better and combining it into, in ways that you didn't think would work, but somehow they do. In that sense, I think the J League represents the best that football can offer. We all want to see the league become bigger and better and improve and do things, but you also kind of just want to freeze it in amber and let it be the same forever. Like, we just love it we love everything about it. We love the food, we love the fans, we love the stadiums, we love the train rides, and the football isn't bad either.
Yeah. I mean, what I've taken from this conversation is that the J League and football culture, just football in general in Japan, is like a microcosm of what everyone at the moment seems to be looking for. And bear in mind, we're recording this in 2026, and over the last few years, as I alluded to earlier in the episode, a lot of people have been looking for that alternative football experience. And I think it comes from there being a serious disconnect and serious issues surrounding the top level of football. Like, you have people in England who are being priced out of tickets and things like that, being branded legacy fans. So everyone is looking for a different type of football experience at the moment, because at the top level it's become so sanitized and commercial. And it sounds to me like Japan is a perfect microcosm of all of the things that people are actually looking for at the moment within football. It's got a supporters culture that is vibrant, welcoming, progressive, fun for people, importantly, as well. But again, still maintains that competitive edge and the rivalries that people love as well. And importantly, it's also an exciting league to watch because, like you said, it's competitive and you don't really know who's going to win it. You know, I can't thank you guys enough for joining me for this conversation. It's been really enlightening, and I hope all of our listeners have got something out of it as well.
Well, thank you very much. Yeah, I really enjoyed it too. Yeah.
Yeah, look, I think that all of us, we just love spreading the gospel. Like, it's such a fun league. We're in the middle of the 100-year Vision League, which the 100-year Vision was sort of a marketing campaign from the mid 90s and the early years of the league that basically said that the league's goal is in a century for everyone, for kids to be able to play on grass, for everyone to have a local club to support, for Japan to, enjoy this healthy and vibrant sporting culture. Like, that's the 100-year vision. And the fact that we've gone from 10 clubs in 93 to 60 clubs today, the fact that there is a straight line from the 9th division to the 1st, is something that, I don't even think that the people who helped create the J League in the early 90s could have imagined that it would go that well that quickly. So I just say, like, the water's warm. Come on in. With this tournament happening, it just started this past weekend. It runs through the first weekend of June. I think the league is broadcasting up to 4 games per round on the international YouTube channel. So it's a little hard, not so easy to pick a team and watch it week in, week out, because I think the league is going to rotate things and pick, derbies and big matchups, and they'll give some smaller clubs attention once in a while too. But it's just a way to watch some good football and see some great atmospheres and get to know the J League, because we're going to start the proper season in August. Hopefully on the back of a very strong World Cup campaign by Japan. And once that happens, I think that this is the start of a new era for the J League. And so, the best time to start following the J League was 30 years ago, and the second best time is, as always, now.
I think that's a really good point as well. And of course, this season is also the beginning of the transition for the Japanese league to go to a winter league as well, which signifies a huge kind of shift culturally as well. But that could be a huge podcast within itself. And we do have the small matter of a World Cup before that, and I look forward to welcoming Japan to Hampden Park on the 28th of March for our warm-up fixture against you. But guys, thank you very much for joining me in this episode today. This has been an absolutely fantastic conversation, and I can't thank you enough for joining us. Thank you once again to all of our listeners who've tuned in for this episode. If you have any questions about it, or if you want to suggest a topic yourself, you can get in touch with us on any of our social media channels, or you can email us at hello@footballheritage.co.uk. This has been episode number 102. Thank you very much once again for listening, and we'll see you all again next week. Goodbye.